Welcome to The Detail. I am your host, Cathy Antunes, and you are listening or watching The Detail on WSLR 96.5 LPFM in Bradenton and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in, Bradenton, Florida, WSLR, Sarasota, Florida. So you can join us online on Facebook Live. With me today, I have Jerry Wells and Martin Hyde, who are both candidates for District 2. There are actually 6 candidates running for the District 2 City Commission seat. That changed recently. There were only 4, but we're doing 2 at a time to really give ourselves the time and space to get to know the candidates well. So gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Good morning, Cathy.
Good morning. Good morning.
We meet again.
Yes, we do. So I would like to begin. I guess we'll start with Martin. Can you tell us, for someone who doesn't know anything about you, Martin, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that's hard, right? Tell us a little bit about yourself and why are you running for city commission?
That's my target audience. That's why I've been on a diet for the last 6 weeks. So people are thinking, looks a bit like that guy, but he's not that guy. Okay. I've been involved in the city. I ran last time at large, because you'll remember that, and I came a fairly poor 3rd out of 8. I decided to stay involved because that particular system at large leaves a fairly big gap for people like me. So I thought I'd give it one more run round the block. I didn't necessarily expect that half of the people in District 2 would be running, but we got a couple of months here where we have the opportunity to share what we know and say what we believe. Jerry is a friend of mine. Jerry's a very nice guy. Other candidates in different form, different ideas. There's only one person that I'm not so thrilled about, and that's the developers candidate. It seems like we have one in every election these days at the county level, and now we have one at the city level who just piled in, called his list of endorsements out as the great and good, but actually they include your nemesis, the Prince of Dark Money in Sarasota, who I'm not sure I'd put that on my list of endorsements. So I'm okay with how the outcome goes, so long as Joe Barbetta isn't in the frame. Okay,
well, Martin, thanks. And Jerry Wells, why don't you're a newcomer, although you have been involved in the city. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and why you're running?
Well, I like the term newcomer, Kath. That means I'm fresh.
Exactly.
Change. I'm the father of 4 children, Rachel, Alex, Nicholas, and Mia. My dad was a police officer. My mom was a school teacher, pretty middle of the road. In full disclosure to everyone watching today, you and I went to high school together.
Yes.
And we became friends years ago working on a project down here. I'm a fiscal hawk. I'm your law and order candidate. I'm a responsible steward of the environment, and I sit on 2 advisory boards here in the city. I'm running because I'm tired of the same old recycled politicians controlling the ship here. It's out of control. We need to change. I'll bring that change. I'll bring accountability, transparency, and integrity to the commission. I'll cut the wasteful spending and run the city like a business. I'm a quick student, a very good listener, and I walk softly and carry a big stick. And like Martin, I too was surprised that Randy Benderson sent his caddy down to get into the race. And so at all costs, we'll make sure that doesn't happen. People deserve choice, and we can't buy the spots here. We've been very conscious of that and put a lot of time into effort. So to send this guy in the 9th inning, somehow he's the big savior of the Republican Party, I don't think so. So we're going to have at it and have a little bit of fun.
All right, gentlemen. Well, those are good introductions. I appreciate you both being here. Let's start off. There's a lot going on in the world that impacts our city. We're certainly going to get to what's going on with the protests and police because of, we are in that moment. But actually what I'd like to start off with is that one of the key issues that city residents care about, the kind of identity of Sarasota is small town living with big city amenities. We do like the fact that there's a relatable, smaller scale aspect to Sarasota, but yet we have all these wonderful amenities, the airport, the ballet, the opera, that big cities offer. So how is Sarasota going to grow? How is the city of Sarasota going to grow is always something on top of mind with many voters. And I want to ask you about administrative approval. For the audience, development decisions which would have required public hearings and neighborhood workshops under administrative approval are instead approved by city staff without hearings. And this has been a hot topic. There have been concerns about staff decisions that were made without public hearings. Where do you both stand on administrative approval? And Jerry, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, Kath, you know that I am about property owner rights. If you buy a piece of property and you have the right to build something and you bought it with those rights, then you should be allowed to do that. The issue, I think, becomes very sticky is when people come in and they're looking for rezoning or they change an application in the middle of construction. And we've seen that, and we've seen some bad decisions. The view, when the building was put right into the middle of the road, that to me was a bad decision. And on Palm Avenue, you see a building that's being built with zero lot line. That again is a bad decision. But we can't continue to make those types of decisions. But I don't want to take away property owner rights.
Right. So do you see administrative approval as doing that? I'm a little concerned, or is this just something you're not quite that familiar with yet?
No, Kath. I mean, we've talked about it a lot.
Okay.
It's always funny when the shoe is on the other foot, when someone's looking to get approval on a piece of property, then all of a sudden the tune changes. I don't think it's proper for someone who lives down the road to tell me what I can and can't do with my property. And if I have that property and I bought it with the rights that I am entitled, and I'll just use a home as an example. If I'm entitled to build a 30-foot home on that piece of property, I don't want someone coming from another part of town telling me that that somehow is disruptive. I can only go 25 feet. So I think it really comes down to the basics there.
Okay. Martin, administrative approval. Do you think that city staff would have too much power? Should we have hearings? Where do you stand?
It's an interesting thing. And I think it's a good thing that we evolve as we get on and we get more experience and more points of reference. I changed my mind about this, and I changed my mind actually as it relates to administrative approval. Whilst I absolutely agree with Jerry about property rights, administrative approval is about pulling back from staff dictating and determining and helping developers to get the max out of something, to giving people that are directly impacted their opportunity to have a say. And given, and particularly with regard to Joe Benderson's, or Joe Barbetta, sorry, his candidacy, I think we need to have this second layer of control to make sure that these things don't just happen when nobody's looking. So as far as administrative approval, what developers are against is it costs money and takes time. But haste makes waste. I think at this stage, my belief on this has evolved, and I believe certainly in certain scale developments, not single family homes, but over a certain size, maybe 4 stories or 6 stories, I think we should have the opportunity to go beyond administrative approval, which is a rubber stamping by staff, and let people, including the commission and the planning board, have some input.
Okay, so my next question is related, and thank you for that. In Sarasota, it seems we have on a regular basis these disagreements or controversies that come up. I mean, Lido Pavilion is one example, Selby Gardens. There's at Bay Vista and Tuttle, a very large apartment complex that's proposed. And the neighborhoods get upset. The people who've been working on the project feel they've been misled because they've been given the green light. by city staff. And so there's kind of competing interests. Neighborhoods want to maintain their quality of life. They want to have input into how their neighborhoods are going to develop. And yet people who have development, as you talk about people who own property, they would like to avoid these clashes with neighborhoods because they're costly. And sometimes a project can be completely derailed, which is expensive for those who are proposing a new development. So I'd like to ask you, have you thought about, or what do you see as the core of this problem? And how would you address it? And if you're not sure, that's fine. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, the problem is obviously greed, and you know, at the end of the day, the old saying applies: self-interest is everybody's pretty much only interest. When it comes to business, the interest is making a profit. If you can take something that's zoned for so many thousands of square feet and you can increase that by going upwards or backwards to the extent that it bothers the neighbors, it increases your profit exponentially. You know, I spoke against Lido. You did a fantastic job building that petition and stopping that happen. I spoke against the orchestra taking part of Payne Park. I spoke very loudly against Selby, and to be honest, that didn't go down too well with a lot of people. And this doctor's hospital, or the old doctor's hospital building there at Bay Vista and Tuttle, that comes into the same category. There are others. There's the development right there on 41 there where the Starbucks is, where they're talking about redeveloping that where Michael's on East is, that plaza. You know, we have a code, we have an agreement. I would be strongly against, as I was with Selby, breaking that down, because the point about property rights and precedent is exactly that. If you give it to one, you have to give it to all. So 75 feet inside a neighborhood with Selby would have turned potentially into 75 feet in every neighborhood. And as far as these ones are concerned, turning a small beach concession into some kind of late night bar, these are all bad things for everybody except for the person who's got their nose in the trough. So I'm for profit. You know, I don't do anything for nothing in business, but when it comes down to it, oil and water, business and people are totally different things. And in this case, we're representatives of the people, not representatives of the business community.
Okay, thank you. Jerry, what are your thoughts?
Well, let's start with, that's always such a sensitive situation, but we need housing. That is a given. You're going to be building now and almost completing a new section of the hospital. So there's going to be a lot of people working now. Where are they going to live? You need that middle-class housing. That was the housing I grew up in. You need your policemen to have closer access to work, the nurse. They have to have access to work. It can't be that we're constantly pushing them great distances out and then having a long commute because things change. So there's that part of the equation. The other side, and I fully understand, no one wants a big building where there was a little small doctor's office and then all of a sudden there's 100 units there. So that's that give and take. But at the same time, you can't build a monstrosity. So there are times when we do have to review it. And I think that comes down to the code and zoning.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm sure we'll come back to development issues because they always seem to pop up. But before we move on to other things, the form-based code, about 5-6 years ago, the city of Sarasota embarked on a project to do a form-based code, and it was supposed to take 2 years. Instead, it took 5 years. It wasn't supposed to cost, it wound up costing over $1 million. And then we actually didn't have a form-based code approved. There were a number of people working on the project. The gentleman, Andrew Georgiadis, who headed up the form-based code effort in Bradenton, where they actually got an appropriate code, form-based code, he left after a couple of years, but it did drag on. And so I'm curious to know your thoughts about that. It seems as if just from a project standpoint, that there were opportunities to maybe take a look at what was going on and see if it needed to be revamped, and maybe the personnel changes should have been made. I'm concerned, and I wonder what your thoughts are about the city embarking on projects that that don't actually result in a usable work product or what was promised. In form-based code, it was over $1 million. And it was intended to clarify these issues that we have so much controversy over. So what take, if any, do you have on form-based code?
Well, we used the Urban Design Studio. You remember she was a big part of that. It was a missed opportunity. When I ran back in 2017, it was pretty much everybody said, we need to change the setbacks. We need to change the Duane plan. There was this whole push. And then it just sort of died on the vine. And I'm really not quite sure why it did. I understand that, these plans are very complex. They run to hundreds of pages, and there's a lot of nuance to them. But it just got left to one side. And what we basically do is we're right back to square one. A few of these issues in the city keep coming back, whether it be homelessness, whether it be affordable housing. And this is another one of those intractable issues that we had the opportunity to fix. And for my money, we spend too much money on reports, but this is one that I think we have to get our teeth in on the next cycle and do something. Because as it stands at the moment, people talk about setbacks. That is the code. That is the way that it is. So we need to make a real effort to get something that we can all agree. And I think most people want to have a little bit more sidewalk. I think most people want to make sure that we don't lose the sky to the point of going any higher. And most people want to make sure that in neighborhoods, certainly the encroachment of larger and tear down McMansions doesn't destroy the fabric. So I think it's doable. I'm really not sure why it died.
Yeah. Okay. Jerry, your thoughts?
Like everything else in the city, it just seems to get pushed down the road, pushed down the road, pushed down the road until it dies. And that's a big issue we have. We need to bring a much more business-like approach. I would never run my business that way, just pushing a decision down, pushing a decision down. We absolutely need some controls on height. It's just not a free-for-all. We cannot turn Sarasota into Fort Lauderdale. So we need to have these codes in place. But the reason I really can only attribute it this dying is just more bureaucracy. And that's something we need to take out of the equation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. So I'd like to turn to what's happening in our nation and also in Sarasota in terms of, the death of George Floyd, and all the events leading up to it have led to this tipping point in the United States, and understanding that there's a need for reform with the police. I think the majority of the country is coming to understand, and certainly what happened to Mr. Floyd, but by a police officer killing him, was, I think, it was a horrible thing, obviously, but it's kind of woken the nation up. So I want to ask you, a week prior to that, we had a Sarasota police officer on video also using his knee to detain someone who was being arrested, a Black man. And there have been complaints over the years about excessive force with our local police. So as city commissioners for District 2, what kind of a role would you see? How would you want to address this concern, which people are protesting about here in our city? Well, Jerry, we'll start with you.
Right. My dad was a police officer, and there is no justification for what happened to that man in Minnesota. Yeah. He was in handcuffs, and it was excessive use of force. Sadly, that does happen. But I don't want you to take one bad, irresponsible police officer and paint them all like that. In Sarasota, we have a tremendous department. Every police officer I've personally met here over the last 31 years has been just fabulous with me and my children. My children were always raised that if something goes wrong, immediately go find the police. They're going to take care of you. What's happened is that the trust between the community and the police officers is broken, and that we can fix. But what I don't want to see is a lawless society. I think we're pushing too far with this abolish the police. I can only tell you that my opinion is if we were to terminate police departments that I'm seeing in the news now, this would be a tremendous mistake because the people that would take over would be lawless.
Okay, so
for good for any of us. Yes, Dawn?
Okay, so Martin, why don't we shift to you? What is your take on
I love you.
on this issue?
How you doing?
Sorry.
That's
all right.
okay.
Really close the door.
So, all right. So, I mean, you asked a specific question about the incident in Sarasota. First off, you know, Jerry's father is a cop. My oldest son is a deputy sheriff in the county. I saw that video of what happened in Sarasota. I also saw the helicopter video from a different angle, different perspective, which showed what happened before as opposed to just what happened in that particular moment. And it really was nothing even remotely close to the George Floyd incident. Of course, it happened before the George Floyd incident as well. And there was a reason why the chief, when she first saw that incident report, dismissed it as justifiable, because when you see the camera from the helicopter, you'll see that it actually was. Coming back to that, though, of course, what happened with George Floyd was terrible. Terrible things happen everywhere. 1,635 miles away. It's 2 or 3 people that participated, and particularly one that was doing it. I know what Jerry says about being treated nicely by police. I am too, partly because of my son, but partly because I'm middle class and everything else. You know, I'm a realistic person. You know, when Stevie Wonder said famously, you know, what's it like to be born blind? And he said, well, it's a lot better than being born black. I think, you know, that's a very profound statement. I think it's true. I don't know what it's like to be a young black man. When I was a young man in London as a kid playing soccer, quite a few of the kids that I played with were black. And when I used to walk out of the stadium with them to the bus or the train, I know we got treated differently in a way that I didn't get treated when I was on my own. So I have a lot of sympathy for it. The answer is not in obviously defunding or going to no-go zones. The answer is, though, in trying to make sure that we listen, we hear, and we recognize that, you know, one of the basic principles, whether you're black or white, is that resisting arrest always leads to bad things. You can argue the toss, you've got due process, but struggling when someone puts cuffs on you does have the potential, because the cops are entitled to defend themselves. And whilst that isn't what happened with George Floyd, 58,000 assaults on police officers in the United States last year, 18,000 bodily injuries. That's an awful lot more that happened to suspects. So you got to understand, these people are paid not an awful lot of money, and they're not frankly paid to get beaten up. So I can see both sides of the argument. I think we have to have a conversation, but it has to be an honest conversation, and recognize that as much as police officers have a responsibility, citizens do too.
Okay, and you know, just to follow up, I also watched the helicopter footage. I think from the helicopter, it wasn't clear that the suspect was being detained with a knee, and I think that Bernadette Tapino has acknowledged, as I think all police departments across the United States, that is not something they get trained to do. And the other piece is,
well, that's not true.
Well, hang on, because I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to me. But the other piece is, I don't think that white families have talks with their sons about, I mean, basically what the Black community is saying is, we're afraid to call the police, and we're afraid to call the police because we may wind up getting hurt. So I guess I'll give you the opportunity to respond, but I also want to, because the defund police movement now it's very confusing. I don't think they're communicating very well, but what the defunding is not necessarily, some are saying abolish, but others are saying, well, we want a reallocation of resources. So the Sarasota budget, the city budget, half of it goes to the police. And we have seen a kind of a militarization of police in the United States in terms of the kind of gear they use. Do you see an opportunity, if you've looked at the budget, do you see an opportunity to put some resources into safety measures or things to address domestic violence or addiction, where resources going into policing might be better spent somewhere else? And Martin, I know you want to respond, so start with you, but that's my question.
Martin, let me just inject one thing there
Wow.
before you get on a roll. I think you have to remember that the police department is a paramilitary organization when you speak about them. And I think that taking funding away will be detrimental to everyone involved. What you need is to provide more funding, more education, and get the police officer and the community together. That's just my opinion. I think the sooner you can work on healing that, the better off everyone will be. There's no reason that any community or any Black person should be afraid to call the police. If there's something going on in their neighborhood, they should feel comfortable to call the police, and not that they're going to get in trouble for actually telling on someone else who's doing something wrong. So I think more resources is more important than less resources in this instance.
Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Martin? No, it's okay. No. Martin.
So we're all friends. So as far as techniques is concerned, and Bernadette DePino, she backed back because she didn't like the way that it came out in the moment. But my son was trained relatively recently in the last 10 years. That is a straightforward takedown technique. It's a 3-step technique. They're not supposed to keep their knee on someone's neck. That's the distinction that makes a difference. But for Bernadette DePino, say they're not trained like that. For a start, Sarasota Police Department does not train its officers to get regulated or certificated by FDLE. That's done elsewhere. And they still do train in these restraint techniques. So, I understand the moment. I understand what she was trying to say and deflect. As far as what you can see on that video, I will have to agree to disagree on that. Getting back to defunding the police, I agree. Again, it's another important distinction. We're not talking about, for the most part, apart from crazy places like Seattle and Minneapolis, actually just abolishing the police department. But why? On what basis? On the basis that we can hug it out better. I mean, addiction, mental health, these are all tremendous issues. I lost a member of staff here very recently to a drug addiction problem, which is frankly, I believe, linked to mental health issues. So absolutely, I believe in extra resources for that. But that's not the same as diminishing resources for the police. This idea that it's militarization, I'm sure a lot of people feel like, cops look scary, but, the streets are scary. We have over 300 million guns in this country, and they're not all in the hands of good people. The idea that you'd send someone in with a knife to a gunfight doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't have any cops, and then people would be sorry. So I'm a complete flip as far as that's going. I don't want people going and beating people with nightsticks and scaring people. But on the other hand, I want to make sure that they have everything that they need to protect themselves. And to a certain extent, there is a deterrent if you know that the people that are coming are fully armed. So the idea that we're going to go back to talking it out, that would end very, very badly.
Okay. I want to remind the audience you're listening to The Detail on WSLR 96.5, LPFM in Sarasota, and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in Bradenton, Florida. If you're just joining us, I am speaking with Martin Hyde and Jerry Wells, who are both running for the City of Sarasota's City Commission for District 2. And Streets of Paradise prepares and serves meals for Sarasota's homeless and food insecure every evening at 6:30 p.m. outside the Salvation Army on 10th Street. Shampoo, soap, deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrushes, razors, shaving cream, and feminine hygiene products are also offered. For more information, go to streetsofparadise.org. So let's talk about, we have a question right now. These two things dovetail. We've got affordable housing issues in Sarasota, and also, a chronic homeless population. Gentlemen, what are your thoughts about affordable housing in Sarasota? How are we going to have policy that will encourage that and addressing our chronic homeless population? Are we doing enough? Jerry, I'll start with you.
Affordable, different than attainable. And we absolutely have to have some affordable housing, and you have to blend it in with attainable housing and upper middle class housing. I think you need to use that policy, if we can implement it, as a strategy to provide housing here. And it would be a give and take, a negotiation. You get something, you can build something over here if you're willing to help and support and build something else over there. The homeless situation is a completely different issue, so I don't want to touch on that. But attainable and affordable housing is incredibly important for this community.
Okay. Martin.
Well, okay. So, I mean, I'm a more practical person. What is affordable? Based on the average wages. Florida is a low wage state. We have a huge gulf here between super rich people living on the water and downtown, and then people providing services to them. I think the lowest level, or the most attainable level, they say the difference between attainable and affordable. What I call affordable at the lowest end is around about $650 a month. And I work that back from the federal levels of poverty, which is around about $23,000 a year. So I'd work from the 650 and work backwards. How do we get stuff for $650 a month? And the way that we do that, cut all the impact fees out, and let's go to very simple accommodation. People don't need 2,000 square feet. They might like it or want it, but the truth is that we simply can't provide that for $650 a month. So I'd increase the density for affordable housing. I would use city land. City has a number of sites of significant size that have been empty and unused for years. And I would go, one of the few things that I'd be prepared to borrow money long term. If we manage it ourselves, we could run for about $3 million a year, around about 1,000 apartments at around $650 a month, because we have the land. We can build them for under $125 a foot. And then when you dial all of that back, and relative to the very low interest rates on our AAA bond rating, we can make this happen. Again, this is one of those things that you go past social and you get to fiscal. I understand how to make that work, and I'm absolutely a fan of it. I like the equity. I like the diversity. We're only going to get this if we're aggressive. Take city land, borrow the money on a 30-year bond, manage it ourselves, and have smaller size units.
Okay. Martin, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you, and it's important in this moment to respond to this. So not that long ago, last year at the Bath and Racquet Club, you lost your temper with some teenagers, told them to cut the grass, acknowledged that you did. They were Hispanic. They were guests of the club. You told them you didn't belong there. This was obviously met with a lot of upset in the Latin community, in fact, the whole community. And, you know, we're in a time right now where the treatment of minorities is in focus, and certainly with regard to the police. And you're also saying that the mayor of Sarasota going to a protest in a black mask, you're comparing Mayor Jen Ahern Koch to an Antifa member. So is this really the tone and the temperament that voters should be choosing? Why would they choose someone who has done these things as you have?
Well, one has got nothing to do with the other. If you put a black face mask on and a black outfit and walk around with the yelling, no justice, no peace, as far as I'm concerned, you are throwing in with Antifa. So I make no apology for that whatsoever. You don't
think there's another way to see that, maybe?
No. As far as the Bath and Racquet, typical cell phone video, didn't show what went on before, the behavior. But let me qualify that. I don't think there's any justification for what I did and what I said. It was terribly insensitive. It was wrong. I have a history of being rude, offensive. And I learned a big lesson, you know, that 4 or 5 days when that happened, I was on the front page of the Herald 3 or 4 out of 5 days. I never thought that my life would turn over to that extent, and it changed me. I recognize and learn that just because I can get away with it doesn't make it right. It changed what's in my heart too. I realized when I look back that that's not who I want to be. That's not who I want to. What I did was just a way of controlling a situation. It was unacceptable. It was exactly and completely the person that I don't want to be. So, you know, people are going to assume that I'm still that person, and I understand that, and I can accept that. I understand. I stayed in the race partly to atone for that. I knew and know that I'm going to face this throughout. I haven't backed away. You know, one of the things about me is you might not like me, but when I've made mistakes, like I did when I was on your radio show, you confronted me with something, and
Yeah.
I told you the truth. And when I was confronted about that bath and racket thing, I could have denied it. There was no actual evidence on the tape. I didn't deny it because I realized that it was a moment in my life. It's not about me. I agree. In this current time, it's about making amends, and I'm going to try to make amends if people will give me the chance, and if they won't, I completely understand.
Okay. All right. So this is a quick question. Strong Mayor, you're both on record saying that personally you support a strong mayor for Sarasota. As you know, this has been voted down numerous times over the past couple of decades, that the city residents have strongly preferred their commission form of government. So my question, since you're strong mayor, you know, you believe in a strong mayor personally, as a commissioner, would you vote to put an amendment to create a strong mayor on the ballot? This has never been done. The strong mayor ballot initiatives have always come from either, well, mainly citizens, but the commission has never taken that step. I'm wondering, they considered it a few years ago and chose not to. So as a commissioner, would you vote to put a strong mayor amendment on the city charter to change the form of government in the city? Jerry.
You know that I'm for a strong mayor. You and I have had this discussion before, and I agree with you on so many things about it. The problem is nothing gets done. But again, this issue, I think, has to be up to the people. Just because I believe one way doesn't mean, and you know my personality.
Well, you see, my question isn't about that. It's about whether you would put, you would vote as a city commissioner to put an amendment on the ballot
put myself
to change. Well, you know, it only takes 3 votes of the city commission to put an amendment to the city charter on the ballot. So what I want to know is, would you be a vote to put an amendment to change the government?
As we all know, it's not working right now. And that's why you have 6 people in this race. And yes, I would be for a strong mayor.
So you would vote to put an amendment on the ballot for a strong mayor? Okay. How about you, Martin?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got video, so of course. And then Jerry's right. You know, this is an issue for people to decide. And if we've had various opportunities over the years, and it's been knocked back, and it's been largely based on this sort of boss man notion that it could be corrupt. I get that, but I'd like to see it, you know, pushed back and kicked around and had a discussion. We changed the date after being told that's not what people wanted, and I think that people would like the opportunity. I think people should have the opportunity. Matt would like.
Well, they have, and every time they say no. Well,
and every time they said no, changing the date, but then they didn't, and things
actually changed. I don't think that was the first time.
The commissioners. I mean, again, backing up, Britain was as a good example. Was forever talking about staying in the common market, and finally the British people changed their mind. People change their mind. Things change, and
they do.
I think periodically you can revisit this. I don't see the problem. I'm not sure what they're concerned about. It's like the school board referendum. If it's a good idea, it will pass. If it's not, it won't. And
yeah, I think the issue is, it's like we keep deciding this. We keep deciding this. We're going to do it again. So anyway, but you both say you would vote for that amendment and put it on the ballot. So that's fine. So I want to move on because we don't have much time. In District 2 on Lido and St. Armands, there have been residents who become very upset about houses which have basically become hotels, like Airbnb rentals. And I'm wondering, how would you address this problem, basically the idea of hotel houses that have become disruptive in neighborhoods.
Okay, well, I'm on that committee, Kath, so I want to open with that. We have a committee out here between St. Armand's and the Lido Beach Residents Association. We're addressing that now.
Okay.
The issue, there's a lot of issues coming on. One is that they're pulling permits as that it's a residential home, and it's not. It's a commercial property. And they're building beautiful homes. They're 8-bedroom homes is another issue. They're not 4 and 5 bedroom homes, and there's multiple cars there. What happened was people are very afraid of the unknown. We were very afraid that this happens next door to you, and it's going to be noisy, become a spring break house, garbage all over, parking all over, 30, 40 people in a house. And that was really where the fear started. So far in the meetings, the group that's come has been very accommodating. They've put signs in the house, they've put noise meters, they've been really doing everything we've asked them to do, but that still doesn't make it right. And the last thing we want out here on Lido is just for the neighborhood to become one big transient hotel. And again, it's not fair to the hotel operator who's running a hotel across the street with security, making sure that things are not getting out of hand. So it's a very delicate situation between the community, the person who's developing the hotel, and the city. And hopefully we'll come to some type of a resolution soon on how this can move or not move forward responsibly. It's very delicate.
Okay. All right. Martin, how about you?
Well, it kind of goes back to that form-based code. Here the horses has already bolted, so we're shutting the gate a little bit late on this. This is a place where, had we had the foresight and realized why people were building 9-bedroom, 8-bathroom homes, that they were trying to create through the back door without all the regulations. Hotels have to have an awful lot more in terms of security, in terms of staffing, in terms of safety than a private home does. So what can we do at this stage? We can absolutely enforce rigorously the local ordinances and codes. Now, obviously, that relates to parking, trash collection, noise, and also make sure through through their pocketbooks, make sure the bed taxes are being paid. Make sure people are paying the taxes. One of the reasons that these people like these things is because the investment return is very good, and I suspect that's largely because they haven't got the same overhead as a hotel. I'm concerned that it changes neighborhoods. I used to live next door to one of these things when I lived in the north end of Siesta. It's not a way to live because when people are on vacation, they behave differently. So we can't do much about what's there now, obviously, but we can enforce, and I would enforce rigidly, not to run them out, but to make sure that they apply the same rules to them as we apply to everybody else on the street.
Okay. So, gentlemen, I want to turn to issues of citizen input and specifically to our advisory boards. Last July, the planning board, who, they make recommendations about these kind of issues, development issues, how we're going to grow. The planning board came before the city commission. They worked with city staff and they made some recommendations about code enforcement. And there were specific issues about debris falling from buildings and also many of development decisions where they're asking for something outside the norm, more density or just some kind of exception. A lot of times there's a major conditional use, which is a code issue that is put in place to kind of reassure everyone that things are going to be okay. An example might be, a noise issue or, well, in any case, last summer when the planning board came before the city commission they basically put together some recommendations and said, we see some problems here and we would like them addressed. The pushback they got from city staff, in particular Tim Litchett, was very strong, and it was received as, it was called a public flogging in the newspaper. The attorney for the planning board said that they were outside of their lane when actually state law says that it's their role to oversee the status and effectiveness of the city's comprehensive plan. So it's kind of a culture question and a citizen input question. I want to know what your take is on the role of the planning board and city advisory boards in general. Do you see an issue with city staff and advisory boards and their role? Is their input important?
Okay, so
just open with.
Well, I'm going to start with Martin this time. Yeah. Okay.
So
That's okay.
There are a couple of issues as far as I'm concerned. One is that it's very apparent that with the current commission that the staff control them 100%. What the staff want is what they got. Now, they didn't like that the planning board, in their view, went rogue, and it turned into a very undignified spat. And whilst I don't necessarily agree on that particular issue, the advisory boards are largely toothless because the city staff make them toothless. You know, we don't even have a proper finance committee, $254 million budget. And all that happens is the budget amendments turn up at the city commission meeting. Commissioners get a couple of minutes to look over them and they go through. Staff runs the city. And that's one of the key things that I want to change. The city commission should run policy, and the city commission should give their advisory boards, just like I do with my staff. You hire good people and you let them do their job. So in this case, I would have supported my advisory board and told the staff that they're to facilitate, not to dictate. Okay,
Jerry, your response?
Well, I actually see that the same way. I feel that staff is running the show, and it shouldn't be that way. The commission should be directing the staff, not the other way around. I sit on 2 advisory boards here in the city, and I'm very frustrated on both of them. They're not listening. And in this particular city, we have so much potential sitting on the sideline on given areas that would love to jump in on advisory boards and actually advise and have the staff follow that. But the staff doesn't. The staff is doing what they want. They're telling the commission, who may or may not understand the particular issue, and the advisory board is neutralized.
Okay, you know, just as a follow-up, and it's related, you know, the Parks Advisory Board, listeners to this show heard a great deal about Lido Pavilion, and the pavilion is still a family-friendly facility, but the renovation that was proposed would have put in $100 day cabanas, would have created a very large bar and restaurant that would have taken up beach parking. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, their input was never solicited by city staff. And again, if you were city commissioners, what would you do specifically to change it? You know, because the policy is that the Parks and Recreation Board was actually supposed to be consulted, and they were supposed to weigh in with a recommendation. And that never happened. Ultimately, they took the bull by the horns and made a recommendation. But do you see something that you could do as a commissioner to structurally require, you know, I mean, it's required now, but it didn't happen. Jerry, how about you?
I sit on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, and I was very frustrated by that. For months and months and months, I asked to see the lease, and what I got was a signed lease. And that whole debacle created by Tom Borwing cost us almost $250,000. That's a lot of money. All we wanted there was to see the lease and give our opinion. We would have never approved a tiki bar, cabanas, all kinds of this nonsense that they were throwing in there, sneaking in there. I remember sitting down and looking at those plans after it was already signed, and I was furious. You can't work that way. It has to follow the process. If there's something going on, it has to come to the advisory board. The advisory board will give the opinion, and then the commission can direct the staff of how we're going to move forward.
So what would you do as a commissioner to make that happen? Would you just talk about it at a meeting, or I don't know. Martin? Yeah.
I mean, sorry. Here's the thing, you know, obviously we all know, and you did a great job there to bring that petition up and to put a kibosh on it. It was obviously a terrible deal, but no point in re-litigating it. The broader point here is obviously that was an insider deal. You know, we might as well name names. You know, we know that it was the Cypriots and the Meshads. We know that a city commissioner has taken donations now from the Meshads. You know, that's wildly inappropriate. People that are on boards of the city should not be doing business in any format with the city, nor have any influence over it. So there's a degree of small town, I wouldn't say corruption, but influence there. And really, it comes down to culture. If you're not going to trust the advisory boards, just shut them down. But we need the advisory boards. The city commission is part-time. So what we need to do is stop employing people, putting people on those boards just because they're friends, and put people on there that want to serve, and then give them the opportunity to actually stand up in front of the commission and tell people what's going on. And the idea that staff would turn up with a deal like that without any opposition was one of the worst examples of the staff running the city, and something that I absolutely won't stand for when I'm on it.
Okay. So we have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to keep your answers brief. I've got two more questions I'd like to ask you. You know, every so often, Sarasota County says they may leave downtown, the county administration building, and you know, as if, and kind of puts this to the city, it's been my observation anyway, as if the city maybe should be doing something about this. I don't know. What do you make of this threat, this constant kind of threat every so often for the county to leave the city of Sarasota, the administration building on Ringling? Would it be good for that land to actually come back onto the tax rolls? I mean, right now the city doesn't get any property tax because it's a government building. Or do you think it would be a big loss and the city has to really work to keep the county, you know, on Ringling Boulevard? How about you, Jerry?
Jerry.
I'll open on this for Martin. The city and the county, they just can't seem to agree on anything. There's no reason to be threatening. Either you want to have an office there or you don't. If you're not going to have an office there, hand it over to the city. We're going to be looking for space. That's always an issue as things move along. I'm sick and tired of all the threatening going back and forth on this particular issue.
Okay, Martin.
Well, you know, it'd be bad for Jimmy John's and the other places that sell sandwiches at lunchtime, because there's several hundred people in there. But it doesn't really create the 24/7 economic impact that a redevelopment of it could. If that was residential, not only would we have tremendous tax revenue, but people would be there all of the time. So, you know, the county offices are there during the week, and most people leave there in the evening. So, no, you know, it's the old phrase about don't let the door hit you on the butt on the way out. Let them go.
Yeah, do you think, maybe a business would go in there too, potentially? Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. COVID-19, the pandemic, you know, there's a lot of experts out there, or would-be experts. This is a public health issue. Quickly, can you tell me what you see the role of city commissioners in terms of educating the public or precautions regarding COVID-19? Martin, we'll start with you.
Well, Cathy, I know you're married to a medical doctor, so I'm not actually an epidemiologist. I'm a practical person. I knew that people would get tired of the restrictions. I knew that eventually people would need to get back out and start living their lives. Social distancing, I think, for people has become, you know, quote unquote, the new norm. I think people are very much more sensitive to people's personal space. I don't think we could have shut things down until we found a vaccine or a cure. And so, you know, here we are in a crosshairs. We got people that are legitimately and reasonably very afraid. And then we got other people that need to make a living.
Okay.
I think we can do it side by side.
Okay, great, Martin. Jerry?
I don't think we fully understood that virus, and the hype that went on with it was a little bit too much. I understand. I take care of my mom, Hyde and she needed to stay out and away from people. And she hasn't left her home since the end of February. And we've been very cautious. But at the same time, you just cannot shut down the economy. There's so many people unemployed now, and some of those businesses may not come back. I have a friend that lost 2 businesses in New York. And sometimes that the cure is worse than the disease. And in this case, I think that's what we're going to find. Okay, well, gentlemen, I'm going to give you each about
30 seconds to tell people where they can find out more about you, a website, and also why should they vote for you? Jerry, you go ahead.
Well, you can go to electjerrywells.com. And the reason people should vote for me is that I will bring a level-headed, common sense approach to running the city business. Thank you so much for your time, Cathy, today. And thank you, Martin.
Okay. And Martin?
Well, hey, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Cathy. People can go to electmartinhyde.com. I think a lot of people already made their mind up, or whether they like me, whether they don't. Some do, some don't. As far as also to look at all of the candidates, and in particular, make sure you don't vote for Joe Benderson, because that guy is going to come over Sarasota. So as far as I'm concerned, take me, leave me, like me, don't like me, but don't vote for Joe Benderson.
Well, all right, then that is the most unusual end to a candidate interview. You certainly do make it interesting, Martin. I appreciate that both of you are running. We do have a lot of choices. I'm inviting all candidates on to talk about their records and doing it two at a time so we can actually hear more from each of you. It's difficult to get in a flavor of who people are when there are six. Indeed. So I want to thank you all for listening and remind you you've been listening to The Detail on WSLR 96.5 LPFM in Sarasota and WBPV 100.1 LPFM in Bradenton, Florida. Streets of Paradise prepares and serves meals for Sarasota's homeless and food insecure every evening at 6:30 p.m. outside the Salvation Army on 10th Street. Shampoo, soap, deodorant, toothpaste, toothbrushes, razors, shaving cream, and feminine hygiene products are also offered. For more information, go to streetsofparadise.org. Thank you all for listening. You can check out the Facebook group I moderate at Citizens for Sarasota County, along with Tom Matrullo. We talk about these issues. We'd love to have your input. Gentlemen, thank you once again. I appreciate your time.
It was a real pleasure.
All right.